Paris, July 1794. The guillotine's silhouette loomed beyond the window, a black spectre against the bruised dusk. Maximilien Robespierre stood motionless, his breath shallow, as the distant roar of a crowd pulsed like a heartbeat through the walls of his modest room. Another head had fallen. The cheers were sharp, jagged, not the pure exultation of '89, when the Bastille crumbled and liberty seemed a hymn. Now the sound tormented him, a reminder that the revolution devoured its own. In his hand, a letter trembled. Unsealed and signed, its words scrawled in haste. "They come for you next, Incorruptible. Trust no one." He crushed the paper against his palm, the ink smearing like blood. Betrayal was a familiar shadow now, slinking through Paris's alleys, whispering in the convention's halls. But who? Danton was gone, his defiance silenced. Saint-Just? No, too loyal. Yet doubt coiled tighter. Robespierre's gaze drifted to the street below. Torches flickered, casting long fingers over cobblestones slick with summer rain. A woman hurried past, her shawl clutched tight, eyes darting as if the night itself might accuse her. 5 years ago, he'd walked those streets too, a lawyer from Arras with ink-stained fingers and Rousseau's words burning in his chest. The Estates General had been a spark then, the Third Estate's defiance ablaze. He'd stood in Versailles halls, voice steady, demanding a world where no man bowed to another. Liberté, égalité, fraternité. He believed those words could rebuild a nation. The Bastille had fallen that July, its stones torn down by hands calloused from plough and loom. He remembered the air thick with dust and hope, the declaration of the rights of man etched in minds if not yet in law. He'd seen it in the eyes of the crowd. Bakers, mothers, poets. All dreaming of bread without hunger, justice without chains. But dreams had soured. Bread was scarcer now, the kings had long severed, and the republic he'd fought for teetered under war and treason. A knock at the door snapped him back. His hand twitched toward the pistol on his desk, a precaution he'd never needed in Arras. "Who's there?" His voice was sharp, thinner than he meant. "Only me, citizen." Eleanor Deplay's voice, soft but steady, came through the wood. His landlord's daughter, his confidant, perhaps more. He opened the door, and her dark eyes met his, searching. "You haven't eaten. The committee meets soon." He forced a smile, tight as his coat. "The Republic doesn't rest, Eleanor." She nodded, but worry creased her brow. She knew the cost of his title now. The Incorruptible, they called him, half in awe, half in fear. As she left, his thoughts wandered to the men who'd shaped this storm. Danton, with his lion's roar and tavern laughter, urging action when others wavered. Marat, pen dripping venom, rousing the people to purge their foes. Saint-Just, young and unyielding, his eyes like steel forged in principle. Allies once, but the revolution was a jealous god, demanding loyalty no man could fully give. Even now he felt their shadows. Danton's warnings, Marat's cries, Saint-Just silences. Pressing against him. He smoothed the crumpled letter and tucked it into his coat. The guillotine's chant echoed again, fainter now, but no less relentless. 5 years since the Bastille, and the blade still hungered. He'd built this republic to free men, not to bury them. Yet the letter's words clawed at him. "They come for you next." Virtue, he'd always believed, would shield him. But virtue, like hope, was fragile in Paris tonight. Robespierre stepped to the window, the guillotine's outline stark against the sky. His reflection stared back. Pale, hollowed, a man who'd traded sleep for a dream. The crowd's roar had faded, but another would rise tomorrow. And he wondered, not for the first time, if his own head would feed it. Paris, June 1793. The Jacobin Club's hall thrummed with heat and voices, a cauldron of sweat and conviction. Maximilien Robespierre stood at the podium, his green coat stark against the room's haze, his words slicing through the clamor like a blade through silk. "Citizens," he said, voice low but unyielding, "the Republic stands on a precipice. Traitors gnaw at its heart. Nobles, speculators, kings in hiding. Will we falter, or will we purge the rot to save liberty?" The crowd erupted, fists pounding tables, shouts of "Vive la République," shaking the rafters. Robespierre's pulse quickened, not from pride but from certainty. Here, in this smoky den of carpenters and clerks, the revolution lived. He saw it in their eyes. Men who'd stormed the Bastille, women who'd marched on Versailles for bread. They trusted him, the Incorruptible, to carve a world where no child starved under a crown's shadow. Yet cracks spidered through the hall's fervor. Georges Danton lounged near the back, his broad frame spilling over a chair, a half-smile curling under his scarred lip. "Fine words, Robespierre," he called, voice booming like cannon fire. But liberty won't feed Paris. More blood won't fill bellies. Ease the purges, or we'll drown in them. Murmurs rippled. Some nodded, others hissed. Danton's pragmatism was a siren's song, tempting but dangerous. Robespierre's jaw tightened. Compromise breeds betrayal, citizen Danton. Virtue demands sacrifice. The Republic's enemies, within and without, laugh at half measures. His gaze flicked to Louis Antoine de Saint-Just, seated nearby, his youthful face a mask of steel. Saint-Just's nod was slight, a spark of loyalty Robespierre clung to. But Danton's words lingered, heavy as the guillotine's blade. As the meeting dissolved into debates, Jean-Paul Marat sidled up, his gaunt frame hunched like a vulture's. His eyes burned, feverish from the skin disease that gnawed him, yet his voice was venomous silk. "You spoke truth, Robespierre," he rasped, clutching a crumpled copy of L'Ami du Peuple. "The people demand justice. Swift, unrelenting. My pen names the traitors, your will can end them." He pressed a list into Robespierre's hand, names scrawled in jagged ink, nobles, moderates, even fellow Jacobins. Robespierre folded the paper without reading it. "Justice, not vengeance, citizen Marat. The Republic must stand on principle, not chaos." Marat's laugh was a dry rattle. "Principle? The people's hunger is principle enough. Don't falter, or they'll turn on us all." He shuffled off, leaving a chill in his wake. Marat's words were a torch to dry tinder, rousing the streets but risking a blaze no one could control. Later, Robespierre slipped out into Paris's twilight, the city's pulse a mix of hope and desperation. He paused at a bakery, its shelves half bare, the air thick with yeast and want. A woman, her face lined like cracked earth, knelt before him, mistaking him for a savior. "Citizen Robespierre," she whispered, clutching his sleeve, "my children haven't eaten in days. When will the Republic bring bread?" Her eyes held no anger, only faith. Faith he feared he'd betray. "I swear it," he said, voice catching. "The Republic will deliver justice, and with it bread." She nodded, tears streaking her cheeks, and he walked on, her plea a weight in his chest. The revolution had abolished feudal dues, toppled the king's statues, but hunger still stalked the alleys. Only a pure republic, he told himself, could end such suffering. Only virtue could bind a nation torn by greed and fear. That night, in his sparse room at the Duplay house, Robespierre sat by candlelight, Marat's list unopened on his desk. Danton's warning echoed. "We'll drown in blood," clashing with Marat's zeal and the woman's quiet trust. The king's trial loomed, a test of the revolution's soul. Louis XVI's head, Danton argued, could buy peace with Europe. Robespierre saw further. A republic born in mercy would rot in weakness. The king must die, not for vengeance, but for principle. He leaned back, the candle's flicker casting his shadow long and thin. Saint-Just's words from the meeting rang clear. "The revolution demands purity, or it dies." Purity. Robespierre clung to it, a lifeline in Paris's storm. But Marat's list, Danton's doubts, the woman's hunger. They pressed against him, a warning that purity might demand a price no man could pay alone. Paris, September 1793. The guillotine's rhythm haunted Paris, a steady thwack that echoed through Place de la Revolution and into Maximilien Robespierre's dreams. By day, he bore it as duty, but at night, it was a pulse he couldn't silence. In the Committee of Public Safety's cramped chamber, he sat hunched over papers, the air thick with ink and dread. Across from him, Louis Antoine de Saint-Just scrawled names with a quill's sharp scratch, his face lit by a single candle. A statue carved from ice and conviction. "We must be unrelenting," Saint-Just said, not looking up. "The Republic's enemies multiply like vermin. Mercy is a luxury we can't afford." His list grew. Girondins, nobles, merchants accused of hoarding. Robespierre nodded, but his stomach twisted. Each name was a life, a story, but also a threat to the dream he'd nursed since '89, when liberty seemed a single step from reality. The door creaked, and a courier thrust a blood-stained pamphlet into Robespierre's hand. "From the streets, citizen," he muttered before vanishing. It was L'Ami du Peuple, Jean-Paul Marat's ghost still screaming through ink. But Marat was dead, stabbed in his bath 2 months ago by Charlotte Corday, a Girondin girl with a blade and a cause. Robespierre had stood at Marat's funeral, the crowd's wails drowning out reason, painting him a martyr. Corday's trial had been swift. She'd faced the guillotine defiant, her pale eyes cursing the terror she'd tried to kill. Her death, meant to quell dissent, only fed the blaze. "Marat's shadow lingers," Robespierre murmured, tossing the pamphlet aside. Saint-Just's gaze flicked up, sharp as a blade. Good. Let it remind the people why we fight. Robespierre wanted to agree, but Marat's venom had always unsettled him. Too wild, too hungry. Yet without it, would the Republic stand? Their work stretched past midnight, the candle guttering low. Robespierre's hand hovered over a decree for more arrests. Is this justice? He asked, half to himself. Saint-Just's answer was a cold hymn. Justice is survival. The revolution dies without it. Robespierre signed, the quill's weight heavier than the blade it summoned. Days later, he walked to Place de la Révolution, drawn despite himself. The crowd was a beast. Ragged sans-culottes, merchants, even children, their cheers and jeers blending into a roar. The guillotine gleamed, its lunette stained dark. A man, some minor noble, knelt muttering prayers. The blade fell, the crowd surged. Robespierre turned away, but a voice stopped him. A woman, her face gaunt but fierce, gripping his arm. Thank you, Citizen Robespierre, she said. He hoarded grain while my son starved. The Republic sees us now. Her gratitude stung more than hatred would have. He nodded mute and slipped into the crowd's shadow. Back at the committee, discord festered. Georges Danton had grown louder, his calls for peace with Europe a thorn in Robespierre's side. One evening, in a tavern near the Seine, Robespierre confronted him. The air reeked of wine and smoke, Danton's laughter booming over the din until he saw Robespierre. Sit, Incorruptible, he said, shoving a chair. You look like death warmed over. Robespierre stayed standing. Your words weaken us, Danton. Peace with tyrants? You'd trade our principles for their gold. His voice was steady, but doubts lingered. Danton's warmth, his ease with men, was a gift Robespierre lacked. Danton's eyes narrowed, his scarred face softening. Principles don't bleed, Maximilien. People do. End this madness. The terror eats our own. Marat's gone. Don't let his ghost rule you. He leaned closer, voice low. I fought for this Republic too. Don't make me an enemy. Robespierre's fists clenched. The Republic demands purity. If you falter, you're no better than the king we killed. He turned, the tavern's heat choking him, Danton's gaze heavy on his back. Purity. Saint-Just's word, his own mantra. But as he stepped into the night, Corday's face flashed in his mind, her defiance a mirror to his own. Had she believed in virtue too? At the Duplay house, Eleanor waited, her knitting needles paused. You're late, she said, concern softening her words. The committee's lists. They grow longer. Robespierre sank into a chair, the woman's gratitude and Danton's plea warring in his chest. The Republic must endure, he said, more to himself. Eleanor touched his hand, fleeting but warm. It will. But at what cost? He had no answer. Outside, Paris slept uneasily, the guillotine's shadow stretching longer each day. Robespierre stared at the ceiling, Saint-Just's lists and Danton's warnings tangling in his mind. Virtue had built the Republic, but blood was its mortar now, and he feared it might bury them all. Paris, April 1794. The spring air carried a tang of iron, as if Paris itself bled. Maximilien Robespierre sat alone in his room at the Duplay house, a single candle casting jagged shadows across his desk. Papers lay scattered. Decrees, petitions, lists. But his eyes fixed on nothing, his mind replaying a sound he couldn't unhear. Georges Danton's voice, defiant even in death. Days ago, Robespierre had signed the order for his arrest, a quill's scratch that severed a piece of his soul. The guillotine had done the rest. Danton's trial had been a storm, his booming laughter mocking the tribunal's charges. Corruption, treason, leniency. You kill the Republic's heart, he'd roared, words that reached Robespierre through whispers, for he couldn't face the courtroom. He imagined Danton's head held high, the crowd's gasp, the blade's hiss. A friend once. A rival always. Now a ghost, joining Marat's in the Revolution's crowded graveyard. Robespierre's hand grazed a letter, its wax seal broken, warning of new plots. They whisper your name in shadows, Incorruptible. The words echoed the note from months ago, a refrain of betrayal that gnawed deeper each day. He'd built a republic on virtue, but virtue seemed a frail shield now, cracking under the weight of blood. That night, he walked Paris's streets, cloaked against the chill and prying eyes. The city was quieter, fear muffling its pulse. Lanterns swayed, casting fleeting glimpses of faces. Hollow, watchful, as if awaiting their own summons. At a corner near Notre Dame he paused, drawn to a child's drawing chalked on a wall. A figure in a green coat, its head a grinning skull, labeled Incorruptible. His breath caught. Was this what he'd become? A specter to haunt the people he'd sworn to free? The memory of Danton's plea surfaced, sharp as a blade. End this madness, he'd said in that tavern, his eyes pleading for reason. Robespierre had turned away, clinging to purity, to Saint Just's cold logic. But purity felt hollow now, a word worn thin by screams. Even Saint Just seemed distant, his silences heavier, his lists longer. Could loyalty waver even there? June brought a fleeting hope. The festival of the Supreme Being, Robespierre's vision to bind the Republic in shared faith. He'd walked at its head, blue coat bright against Paris's gray, incense curling skyward as choirs sang of reason and virtue. The people had come, thousands strong, but their cheers were tepid, their eyes wary. Whispers followed him, tyrant. Fanatic. The festival, meant to heal, had only widened the rift. He'd seen it in the convention's faces. Men who once clapped now averted their gaze. Back in the committee, paranoia coiled tighter. Robespierre's speeches stumbled, his accusations vaguer. Traitors everywhere, but who? A fictional confrontation crystallized his fears. Saint Just, entering late, his coat dusted with rain, met Robespierre's question with a pause too long. We serve the Republic, Saint Just said, but his eyes held a flicker. Ambition or doubt? Robespierre pressed no further, but the moment lingered, a splinter in his trust. One evening, Eleanor found him pacing, his face pale as the moon. You don't sleep, she said, setting a cup of broth he wouldn't touch. Paris speaks of nothing but fear. Your name carries it. Her voice was gentle, but the truth cut. He wanted to tell her of the Republic's dawn. 89, the Bastille's fall, the Declaration's promise. But the word stuck. Fear keeps us alive, he said instead, hating the lie. She left silently, her footsteps fading like hope. Alone, Robespierre pulled the latest letter from his coat, its warning stark. Thermidor plots your end. Thermidor. July's revolutionary month, now a looming shadow. He'd fought for a nation where no man knelt, but the revolution was aflame, consuming all it touched. Danton's laugh, Marat's cries, Corday's stare. They haunted him, a chorus of warnings he'd ignored. Virtue had been his guide, but what if it led only to ash? Outside, a cart rumbled, carrying tomorrow's condemned. Robespierre closed his eyes, the guillotine's rhythm faint but relentless. He wondered, not for the first time, if the blade might soon call his name. Paris, July 28, 1794. The convention's hall was a furnace of shouts, a chaos Maximilien Robespierre had once mastered but now could only endure. He stood at the podium, his voice hoarse, fraying like threadbare cloth. Citizens, he tried, the Republic faces traitors within. Men who'd sell liberty for peace. But the words drowned in jeers. Faces he'd known for years. Call out Bill Laud, even moderates he'd swayed in 89. Glared back, their eyes cold with accusation. Tyrant, they called him. Despot. A man he'd once trusted, tall and hawk-faced, rose and pointed. You've bled France dry, Robespierre. The hall roared agreement, a tide turning against him. His gaze caught Louis Antoine de Saint Just's, seated nearby, but Saint Just's face was unreadable, a mask of loyalty or resignation. Robespierre's heart sank. The republic he'd built was slipping through his fingers, and he stood alone. Hours later, the end came swiftly. At the Hôtel de Ville, where Jacobins rallied one last time, Robespierre sat with Saint Just, papers strewn like fallen leaves. Eleanor Deplay had slipped him a note. Flee, Maximilien. But he'd crumpled it, resolve outweighing fear. The Republic deserved his stand, even if it killed him. When troops burst in, muskets gleaming, he reached for a pistol, but a shot cracked. His own or another's, he'd never know. Pain seared his jaw, blood pooling as he collapsed. Saint Just stood firm, unyielding, but both were bound, dragged through streets alive with torchlight and hate. In a dank cell, Robespierre lay on a cot, the wounds throb a dull companion. His thoughts drifted to Arras, a boy reading Rousseau by lamplight, dreaming of a world where justice ruled. The Bastille's fall flashed next. July 89, crowds chanting for liberty, the Declaration of the Rights of Man a beacon. He'd fought for that world, through Danton's pragmatism, Marat's fury, Corday's defiance. But virtue, his lodestar, had led here. To a cell, to a blade. Was it worth this price? He whispered, the words lost to stone walls. Dawn broke, July 28th, gray and merciless. They marched him to Place de la Revolution, the cart's wheels grinding over cobblestones. The crowd was a sea. Some jeered, spitting tyrant. Others wept, clutching tricolor ribbons, mourning the incorruptible they'd loved. Robespierre's eyes traced the guillotine, its blade a silver crescent against the sky. Saint just walked beside him, silent, their fates entwined to the last. At the scaffold, the executioner tore the bandage from his jaw, and agony flared white-hot. Robespierre bit back a cry, his gaze sweeping the crowd one final time. A woman, face lined like the baker's from '93, met his eyes, her expression unreadable. Gratitude or betrayal? He'd never know. The lunette clamped shut, cold against his neck. His thoughts raced. Danton's laugh, Marat's pen, the Declaration's words. Men are born free. Had he kept that promise, or broken it? The blade's hiss was a whisper, then silence. Days later, Paris exhaled. In a narrow street, a man, calloused hands, patched coat, paused at a bookseller's stall. He lifted a tattered pamphlet, its title bold, Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. He read silently, lips moving, then tucked it inside his shirt, next to his heart. The city stirred, quieter but not still, as if the revolution's ember glowed yet, waiting for a wind to rise.